What's happening, everybody? On today's show, Zach Blackerby, host of Locked on Auburn, joins us to preview Auburn's A-Day game happening this weekend. Will there be a surprise at quarterback? What else should we be watching for? Locked on SEC starts right now.
You are Locked on SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what is happening, everybody? Welcome into Locked on SEC. Great to have you guys along. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. And remember, Locked on SEC is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube and at lockedonsec.com. Let's jump into it. Let's welcome our buddy Zach Blackerby, host of the Locked on Auburn podcast. Zach, welcome in, man. Finally, we had Mizzou last month. They were kind of the weirdos, got their spring game out of the way, but finally, we're getting Auburn. They are first up with their spring game this weekend. How excited are you?
Yeah, not that there's anything else going on this weekend with Masters the day before Easter, and then Auburn's got a little organized public practice going on, and I got to be the best man at a wedding, Gordy, as well, because my best friend, of course, gets married while Auburn's playing football. I don't know what's up with that.
And you got a newborn baby. You got all kinds of stuff going on.
I do.
Let's talk a little bit about this because I know Hugh Freeze just talked about it this past week. They are having an A-Day game, but it's going to be a little bit different than what people are used to. They're going to do the whole scoring system and giving points for different plays made and all that kind of stuff. So what can fans kind of expect out of this? Because it won't be your, I guess, traditional kind of spring game.
My understanding of what he's going to do, Gordy, is he's going to throw up a certain amount of points for the defense, and he's going to look at the offense and say, all right, you got a certain amount of time and a certain amount of plays to match this. Good luck. The winner gets steak. The loser gets hot dogs is exactly what he said in his press conference earlier this week. And I like it, one, because it's different. And two, I think it kind of lays out a goal, right? Maybe something about if you're quarterback and you look up at the scoreboard, and he didn't say what that number would be, Gordy. I'm thinking mid-20s, 24, 27. I don't know. But if you look up and like, oh man, I'm down 20-something points, do you respond a certain way? Because Auburn quarterbacks, they haven't really had that kind of moxie of, oh, I'm down multiple scores, I need to do something about it, probably since Nick Marshall. I mean, Bo Nix and Jarrett Stidham were good, but they never really had that moxie, that it factor where like, oh no, I need to go out and score and see what happens. So that's kind of the way we spun it on Locked on Auburn to see, okay, maybe there's a way you can kind of package that into maybe some information we'll learn about some of these quarterbacks. Because, I mean, for the most part, I guess some people would say, unfortunately, we kind of know who these quarterbacks are, Gordy, with the exception of Holden Geriner. Like, we know who TJ Finley is for the most part, and we know who Robby Ashford is for the most part. But maybe they'll show us something different on Saturday.
Well, that's where I want to start, with the quarterbacks. That is what's going to get a big focus of the attention. I really thought Hugh Freeze coming in was going to go to the transfer portal and bring in a quarterback this spring. They didn't. They flirted with Grayson McCall at Coastal Carolina. He didn't come over, whatever. But Robby Ashford, I just thought it would be better to bring in somebody to push him. Not to say TJ Finley doesn't have the talent to be that guy to push him. He maybe could, but kind of what have you seen? What have you heard throughout this spring with the quarterbacks? Because I know early on it was bad from what I heard from some people out there. Said it wasn't great what they saw, but also Hugh Freeze said it himself. It's hard to get a read when you have a Robby Ashford who uses his legs as part of his game, but he's got the no contact jersey on. So it's hard to, when you blow the play dead, when if it was a real game, he'd be taking off running.
Yeah, and he compared that to kind of, how he had to evaluate Malik Willis when he was at Liberty. And, I think some Auburn fans may be holding out hope that Robby Ashford can have some kind of Malik Willis type ascendance. I'm not holding my breath in that regard. And I'm curious to see how much Robby Ashford we even see on Saturday. I mean, there's been some reports and folks that I've talked to where I think he's a bit limited. That shoulder, I don't think is fully 100%. That's what he kind of dealt with at the end of last season. And I don't know if that's entirely behind him, Gordy. So we'll certainly see what that usage is like. If you had to look at, who is the best in the first practice and who is the most consistently, effective throughout all of spring, it's probably TJ Finley. And I mean, we've said this before. TJ Finley won the job last year. He beat out Robby Ashford for the job last year. When all things were equal, he was the higher performer of the two. Now, it's a different offense. You know, there's a different level of what Hugh Freeze demands out of quarterbacks than what Brian Harsin did. In theory, that's certainly what Hugh Freeze is saying. And so we'll see if he's the first one that they trot out there on Saturday. But look, you mentioned Holden Geriner and like what he did at the pro day throwing next to Cam Newton. He won a lot of folks over that day with that performance. And sure, he's throwing against air, whatever. But a few days prior, we saw these quarterbacks throw against air, and they were 2 yards short on almost every route that they threw. It was bad. I did a reaction show to that, Gordy, and I said that was the worst throwing session for quarterbacks that I've ever seen. And now you've seen Holden kind of take these steps. I'm getting texts from folks that were, stay for the entirety of practice. We only get this 20-minute window, and they're saying Holden won today. And so I think you're starting to get some positive momentum from Holden, but he's still not consistently with the ones right now. It's still TJ and Robby that are consistently with the ones day in and day out.
Yeah, and it just feels like as good as Holden could play, that a lot of times you're going to defer to experience. And obviously TJ's got a ton of starts under his belt, and Robby Ashford a majority of last season. Let's talk about pass catchers, because to me, you're only as good as your pass catchers if you're a quarterback. We saw TJ Finley at times throw inaccurate passes, but I saw at times the last 2 years he put balls in guys' hands and they dropped it.
Yeah.
It sounds like they have some better pass catchers this time around. They feel good about this group of guys, from Tavares Dawson, Javarius Johnson. Talk a little bit about the receiving corps.
Yeah. And, Gordy, I think part of the concerning thing is like this room is pretty similar than it was a year ago. You lose Shedrick Jackson. He's going to try his hand at the NFL. He also ran out of eligibility. He could not come back. But a lot of these dudes were on last year's roster. Camden Brown never really saw playing time till after Brian Harsin was fired, which was kind of curious. I mean, he won fall camp almost every day. He was labeled as like playmaker of the day like 12 times. I mean, it was a ridiculous amount. You never really saw him on the field. So Camden Brown is a guy you're kind of expecting him to be the number one receiver in this offense. When you look at what Hugh Freeze did at Ole Miss, these big body receivers, Laquan Treadwell, AJ Brown. I think Camden Brown is going to be the guy that kind of hopes to fill that role. But after that, it's a bunch of dudes where you're like, okay, can they do what we thought they would do last year, this year in a Hugh Freeze style of offense? Coy Moore seems to be one of the first guys out consistently. And then really the only new face, Gordy, is Nick Mardner, the transfer from Cincinnati. Massive dude. Some places have him at 6'4". I've seen some places list him as high as 6'6". Regardless, you stand next to this dude, he is very, very large. He is very, very long, very, very tall. And Hugh Freeze talks a ton about his catch radius and how effective that could potentially be as far as having to defend that. So I think those are your two outside guys. And then Javarius Johnson and the slot. And, maybe I hope somebody else breaks through, but it's a lot of familiar faces from what we saw a year ago.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I thought Coy Moore was a guy that could take that next step last year. Man, we saw glimpses. We saw times where he had some big catches and then other times where he just completely disappeared. So this Hugh Freeze system, obviously, we think it'll be more friendly with the offensive full course with Phil Montgomery coming over. So we shall see. I want to get to the backfield, and then we'll switch over and talk some defense in just a sec, Zach, so hang tight. But first, we do have to remind our listeners that this episode is presented to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and now is the perfect time to go download the FanDuel app. It is America's #1 sports book. New customers get that no sweat first bet up to $1,000. It's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. You just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line to points scored, three-pointers drained. Go check them out wherever you get your apps. It is the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Don't miss out on your chance for the no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets, and go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Continue our conversation with Zach Blackerby, host of Locked On Auburn. And Zach, kind of finish off the thought on Auburn. Let's talk running backs because, man, it feels like Auburn's always got somebody in that backfield throughout the years. There's always been some big bell cow back that has been ready to step up and carry the load. Of course, Tank Bigsby is off to the NFL. Where are we with Auburn and the running back spot?
Yeah, I think everything about Auburn's offense right now points to Jarquez Hunter being one of the more productive backs in the SEC in 2023. I think this revamped offensive line is going to be a big part of it. And I just think the nature of Jarquez Hunter getting more touches may bring that average yards per carry down, but I think he's going to be highly, highly effective. I think 1,200, 1,300 yards from scrimmage for Jarquez Hunter isn't out of the question. It certainly will be interesting to see how Hugh Freeze uses the running back room as far as rotation, as far as, the backs in the stable. What exactly is that going to look like from a market share standpoint? But you got to love what Jarquez Hunter brings to the table. And look, Hugh Freeze, throughout his time at Ole Miss and throughout his time at Liberty, has coached a lot of really effective offensive players, but not really at running back. Jarquez Hunter is the best running back Hugh Freeze is going to have the opportunity to coach so far in his career. And we'll see if that changes with Jeremiah Cobb on the way in. He's going to be a special player at the college level once he gets here in summer. But I mean, I'm expecting Hugh Freeze to have some creative fun with Jarquez Hunter. But they went out and got Brian Badtee, the running back / return specialist from the University of South Florida. We'll see exactly how he fits into the offense. Could be a gadget type guy, very, very elusive, can kind of, get to the outside and cut Gordy. And he's really, really hard to tackle outside of the tackles. So those are two intriguing guys. And then Damari Austin, we saw a good bit of him as a true freshman last year. Can he take that next step and really fend off Jeremiah Cobb for, who could possibly be that number 3 running back this year?
Where are we in the trenches? I know they spent a lot of time and effort on rebuilding this offensive line this offseason, particularly through the transfer portal. But it seems like, at least on paper, it's a lot of new faces, but seems like should be a stronger group. Yeah.
So they went out and got 3 transfer guys. They got 8 total offensive linemen, but 3 through the transfer portal. And they're all 3 going to start. And it's been amazing, Gordy. You've pretty much seen the same offensive line every single day since the first time we were able to kind of trot out to practice. They haven't really done a whole lot of experimenting at all. They know what they've got, or they feel like they know what they've got, and they're rolling with it. So Dylan Wade is starting at left tackle. He's the guy that they brought from Tulsa. And then you've got at right tackle Gunnar Britton. He was the left tackle at Western Kentucky for the last several seasons. A lot of experience with those 2 guys. And then probably even more experience with the center, Avery Jones, from East Carolina. Those 3 guys are your staples. They really believe in Jeremiah Wright, probably at that left guard spot, Gordy. We saw him play left guard last year, and he was probably the best offensive lineman in the Brian Harsin era, but they didn't really want to start him for whatever reason. And now this spring, he's kind of been battling some injuries, but we'll see certainly how he kind of recovers from that over the summer, but he'll probably start at left guard in the fall. And then Tate Johnson. Hugh Freeze loves Tate Johnson. And for those who aren't familiar, Tate Johnson started at center last year for Auburn when Nick Brahms kind of retired and stepped away from the game a little more than a year ago now. So that's probably your offensive line, Gordy. And I think, like you said, on paper, but just looking at these guys, I spent a lot of time watching these guys during these media viewing windows. They passed the eye test more so than any Auburn offensive line for the last 5 years, Gordy. Probably the best Auburn offensive line since 2017. Granted, that bar's lower than a lot of Auburn people would like to admit, but still, I think this group's got a lot of upside.
And what jumps out to me, Zach, is senior. I mean, that's a lot of upperclassmen with a lot of experience that, you kind of contrasted to an LSU that started bookend true freshmen last year at tackles. You need that experience when you get the SEC play, and so that should help them. And we'll see how they gel. One last thought on the offense, Zach. Rivaldo Fairweather, I know, has come over at tight end, and I know people are expecting big things out of him. A little bit on the tight end spot, and what to expect with the Philip Montgomery combination with the Hugh Freeze offense.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we really know. And he was kind of asked about that earlier this week, Hugh Freeze was. And he was just like, yeah, what you see on Saturday isn't like what we're actually going to do. It's not actually who we are, but still come out and support, pay the $10, which I think is ridiculous, but it is what it is. Yeah. Rivaldo Fairweather, when he jumps in the air for a football, Gordy, it takes him a few seconds to start coming back to earth. I mean, he just kind of floats, and he's so big and he moves so well. And so we'll see how he fits into this offense. It's so funny because when Hugh Freeze came and then Landon King, who was in the portal when Hugh Freeze was hired, he came back to Auburn. Everybody's like, oh, he's going to be this Evan Ingram type receiver / tight end that we saw him, at Ole Miss. And I don't think that's the case. I think it's Rivaldo Fairweather. And so you think about how Evan Ingram was used, a lot of pre-snap motion, a lot of big slot type stuff, a lot of inline stuff, hand on the ground, hand off the ground, doing all sorts of things. I think that's going to be Rivaldo Fairweather. And look, Hugh Freeze is really enamored with the tight end room. Tyler Fromm, Luke Deal. I mean, there's a lot of guys in this room that have a lot of upside. Micah Riley Ducker is more of that athletic tight end type build, kind of backing up Rivaldo Fairweather. And then Brandon Frazier, he's 6'7". He's been at Auburn for forever. Can he kind of finally find a role in this offense? But there's a lot to like about the tight end room, and that's really one of the main things you can ask Hugh Freeze, and he'll actually be excited and be like satisfied with where they are in the development of a roster. So, expect good things from Auburn's tight ends.
Let's switch gears to talk about the defense. Ron Roberts comes over and, some experience, some new guys, but there's a guy coming over in the portal that I think I've read about 3 or 4 different articles on him in recent weeks, and that is Mosiah Nasili-Kite coming over, a guy who's got a lot of experience, but I've read his name. I think I've read a little bit about Elijah McAllister. I mean, there's been a bunch of new guys on this defense that I think have been turning some heads. So just talk a little bit about the defense and some guys you think are going to be important this year.
Yeah, Elijah McAllister, of course, the transfer Jack linebacker from Vanderbilt. And we're kind of expecting a battle between him and then the incoming 5-star, the lone 5-star in Auburn's class, Keldrick Falk. We'll certainly see both of those guys rotate. I think they kind of do different things, so that should be pretty fun to see how they use those guys. But yeah, a lot of guys via the transfer portal coming in. Justin Rogers, former 5-star defensive tackle who was at Kentucky for a few seasons, and then Lawrence Johnson, Lawrence Johnson, who's a big body defensive tackle, formerly at Purdue. He came in and he joins a defensive line group that already kind of had a nice combination of upside and experience. Jason Jones was a full-time starter a year ago. They acquired him via the portal from Oregon a little over a year ago. That Marcus Harris is a similar situation. He came over from Kansas, and both of those guys had pretty solid seasons a year ago. And then Jeffrey Mba, who is one of the best defensive JUCO players in his class. He didn't see the field as much as we thought he would last year, but he's really catching the attention at kind of playing that true defensive end role, that 5 technique. So I think they've got 8 or 9 guys that they really, really like, Gordy. I don't know how good at rushing the passer they're going to be, but I think they feel really good at stopping the run. The big thing is, can a guy like Keldrick Falk turn into one of those special players? Can he be Carl Lawson? I think that's kind of what Auburn needs him to be.
Yeah, I mean, you lose some big leaders like Colby Wooden and Derek Hall and Owen Peppo and, guys who played big parts on that defense the last couple of years. And not to say other guys can't. It's just going to be some new faces. I do like the secondary. I mean, you got a lot of experience there led by Nehemiah Pritchett and all the different faces you got back there. But it feels like Zach Etheridge has a pretty good group back there in the secondary.
Yeah, and DJ James is the guy at corner. I mean, Auburn's had a really, really nice run of number 1 corners all the way back to Carlton Davis, to Jamel Dean, to Noah Igbenogany, Roger McCreary, and then DJ James is the next guy. And we saw what he did last year, and I made the argument using PFF numbers and stats and total snaps played and all this stuff. I think he's the best returning corner in the SEC, Gordy. I think he's that good, and I think he was used in a way that didn't match his skill set a year ago. And so what it allows you to do is, when you have a guy like that, is whether it's Nehemiah Pritchett that's opposite him or Kayan Lee, who's a former Ohio State commit that they flipped on early signing day. Kayan Lee may cause some upperclassmen to transfer. I mean, he is having that good of a spring. They can't keep him off the field. He is very, very special. He'll wear number 3 on Saturday. So we'll see that battle between Kayan Lee and Nehemiah Pritchett. But I mean, they've got a lot of dudes. Keontae Scott, he was the number 1 corner in the JUCO ranks in his class, and he was a late arrival last fall to campus, and still he was so good that they had to put him on the field. It can kind of do both. He can play outside, he can play nickel. And then the move from Jalen Simpson to corner to safety last year, they did that out of necessity due to injury, and he's just excelled. He's totally excelled in that role. Donovan Kaufman, the former Vanderbilt transfer, he's got a few years at Auburn under his belt now. Can he kind of take that next step forward? Auburn's going to have probably a top 3, top 4 defensive back room in the SEC, Gordy. The question is that going to show up on stats? Once again, I'm concerned about rushing the passer. And so a lot of these times when the quarterback's got 5 or 6 seconds to throw, everybody yells at the corners for allowing a guy to get open. And that doesn't help them statistically, but we all know, like, you need help from your pass rush. I don't care how good you are defensively on the back end. You need to rush the passer.
Fun fact, Donovan Kaufman and Coy Moore both went to my high school. So shout out to those guys. Archbishop Rummel there in New Orleans. So.
Okay, so Coy Moore was talking to the media, and he's like, you know what? I went to the same high school as Chris Gordy. And I'm like, no way. No way.
Yeah, I think the conversation is more, we went to the same high school as Jamar Chase. That's what everybody points to now. But nonetheless, all right, one more segment with our buddy Zach Blackerby as we get set for Auburn and expectations for this season. Thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. And a reminder, Zach, to let all our listeners know we got the an NFL draft newsletter for anybody that wants to go check out and follow all of our great SEC players as they head to the next level. Maybe you got a favorite NFL team out there. Go sign up for our NFL draft newsletter. It is a great, great resource that's going to bring you all the detailed content that you want when you get ready for this NFL draft. And of course, if you could go to lockedonpodcast.com/newsletters, sign up for our free NFL draft newsletter. Luke Inman bringing you all the NFL draft content that you could want. So go do that right now. Zach, let's get into this as we look at Auburn's schedule. Expectations for this upcoming season. We'll have the A-Day game this weekend, but as we kind of start to look ahead, what are realistic expectations for Hugh Freeze in year 1?
Yeah, when we go into this conversation, I want to add the caveat. What happens in the May transfer portal window is going to be very important because I think the answer can change depending on if Auburn gets a quarterback or not. I don't think they feel...
You think they will?
I think they have to. I think they have to. Yeah, I think they have to. I think they have to. Yeah, because I don't know. You certainly got to bring somebody into transfer. I can't imagine all 3... Robby Ashford, TJ Finley, and Holden Geriner. I can't imagine all 3 stay. I mean, the narrative throughout all of spring has been, well, TJ is going to leave afterwards because now we can grad transfer after the spring. But then there was rumors, somebody on a message board who works at one of the leasing offices in an apartment complex downtown. They're like, yeah, TJ came in asking about, apartments for next year. So who knows? But I love this time of year, Gordy.
Oh, yeah, yeah. My cousin works at TCBY, and he heard from a janitor there that, it's always fun rumors.
Sounds legit to me. But, yeah, so, I don't know. I mean, the assumption was he was going to leave, but I don't know if we really all thought he would be the best performer throughout all of spring. So I think that's kind of part of this. And then, if you're Holden Geriner and you're still, 3rd on the depth chart, and you bring in another backup, how does that work? I mean, I think they're going to have to bring in a guy anyway, just to kind of have enough bodies. You get Hank Brown coming in. He's a 3-star dude that was committed to Hugh at Liberty, followed him to Auburn. But I don't know. I just can't imagine all 4 of those guys being the 4 quarterbacks you take into the fall season. So we'll see. But right now, I would say 7-5. Now, if you go out and somebody kind of surprises people and they enter the portal and, maybe it moves up to 8-4, maybe 9-3, but it just kind of depends on who you get at quarterback, Gordy. That's going to be a big, big question.
Well, let's step through it real quick because I always just like to really walk through it. UMass in week 1, we expect that's a W. Week 2 at Cal. It's never easy to go on the road to a Power 5 team, but Cal has been down. So I would say
Cal's
that's a
pretty
game.
bad.
It feels like a game Auburn has to win, but again, it is a road game. So may not be easy. But let's just pencil in a W there for now. Then you get Samford at home. That's a W. Week 4 at Kyle Field. Again, a tough environment to go into. So we'll put that maybe as a 50-50 because we just don't know what A&M is right now.
That's cool.
Home for Georgia, I'm just going to go ahead and give them a loss there. Even though we don't know who Georgia's quarterback is.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
At LSU, again, a place Auburn rarely ever wins. I know they did win there with Bo Nix, but it's a place they rarely ever win. So maybe I'll give them a loss there for now.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Home for the 2 Mississippi schools, Ole Miss and Mississippi State, both in a little bit in transitions. Ole Miss with roster transition, Mississippi State with personnel transition, moving from Mike Leach to Zach Arnett. But Will Rogers is back. Is it fair to say 1-1 in those two?
I think so. I was going to say split them. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Then you're at Vanderbilt. I know they're improved, but that's one you got to have. At Arkansas, another one that's just one of those classic SEC battles that's tough place to play. We'll see what time of day is it. Is it one of those sleepy 11 a.m. games? Is it a 2:30 CBS? Where does that game fall? And then New Mexico State is a W, and then the Iron Bowl, we'll put an L there for now. I mean, I think that's about fair. You said 7-5. Just kind of looking at that on surface, I'd say that's about fair.
I think so. And then can you get a signature win in your first year if you're Hugh Freeze? Can you beat A&M in College Station? Can you somehow the Iron Bowl at home has a weird feel to me. I mean, it always does, but when Auburn has something to play for, Nick Saban doesn't typically beat Auburn. I mean, obviously there's exceptions, but what can you do up to that point?
And the Hugh Freeze factor. He has saved his number that time.
He's done it. He's done it. I think the teams he had were a little bit more talented than what Auburn's going to have this year, but still, like he's done it. So, and that's what Auburn needs. Auburn needs a coach that's not afraid of Nick Saban in Alabama. I think that was one of the many factors in bringing in Coach Freeze. And so we'll certainly see. But yeah, I think right now 7-5, with a chance to maybe go to a fun bowl game. I think that's it. And then Gordy, you've got to have kind of proof in the pudding that this 2024 recruiting class is going to start to take shape. I mean, it really, with the amount of energy and buzz around the football program from a recruiting standpoint, it would be a disappointment, I think, at this point, if it wasn't a top 10 class. I mean, I think that's the kind of energy and expectations that we're putting into this, especially with getting Walker White, the quarterback, so early and all the recruitment that's kind of happening there. If Auburn can go 7-5 and have a top 10 recruiting class, I don't care if it'd be 6 in the SEC. It's a top 10 recruiting class. And then you go into the portal with a lot of buzz and a lot of immediate needs and a strengthened NIL situation. I think Auburn would be in a good spot.
Yeah, it's sitting there right now at 22, but with only 4 commits, but all 4 stars and all pretty high-profile players. Like you said, Walker White, Jamarian Burnett, and then 2 DBs. Yeah, I can certainly see Auburn start climbing up that. And you're right. I mean, optimism starts to build and, a 7-5, but what does a 7-5 look like? And it was funny, as I was saying, a tough road trip to Arkansas, not even forgetting that, Hugh Freeze and Liberty just beat Arkansas.
Beat them last year, right?
Oh, I mean, wouldn't you have a better personnel at Auburn? Like, you can't go lose to Arkansas a year after you just beat them with Liberty. So, anyway, It's just kind of an interesting look at it. And I guess lastly, what are you most excited about? I guess getting everything's capped off with the 8-8 this weekend.
Yeah, I think really just kind of seeing what the offense looks like, even though Hugh Freeze told us, hey, this isn't what it's necessarily going to look like, but just seeing actual like passing patterns will be nice, not like high school level stuff. I mean, we haven't seen a sophisticated passing offense at Auburn like maybe ever, Gordy. And I think we're finally going to get to see that. And then, like, there's a lot of energy about what's happening this Saturday, and it stinks that it looks like the weather is going to be bad, but there's a tremendous amount of recruits that are here. A lot of dudes that seem pretty close to popping. Like maybe there's a kind of 2 or 3 guys that commit on Saturday. I think that would be super, super fun. But yeah, until Auburn answers the quarterback situation, everything else just kind of seems to be on pause right now, Gordy. I don't mean to sound like a downer, but until they figure out who the quarterback is, everything else has to kind of wait.
Well, there you have it. We'll be watching all the other spring games to see where Auburn's future quarterback is and what he's doing this spring, because he'll be there very soon, we expect. He is Zach Blackerby. Of course, check him out. Does a great job over at Locked On Auburn. And Zach, thanks for the time, man. We'll do it again real soon.
Hey, thanks, Gordy.
All right, that's Zach Blackerby, host of Locked On Auburn. This has been Locked On SEC. Thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. Now you can go make your second listen. Check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast. They're recapping all the action from the other night. UConn winning the national championship. What does it look like heading into next year? I already saw one of the early betting odds has Kentucky as the odds-on favorite to win it all next year because they're bringing in the #1 recruiting class. So go check out a Locked On College Basketball podcast today. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.